In studio today, Midtown Manhattan, with a very special guest, a friend of mine, and one of the most important journalists walking the earth. That is Peter Schweizer. Good morning, Peter.
Hey, good morning. Great to be here, Alex.
Peter is the president of the Government Accountability Institute and a senior contributor to Breitbart. And today we are talking about his book, Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. I got to tell you, Peter's going to be here the whole hour, and I could already say 30 seconds into the hour that we will not have enough time to cover all the things I want to cover. The book is so important, Peter, and let's just start big picture. You are doing research. You make it so clear. The book is such an indictment of our media. It is staggering. I have to start with this. You unearth one fact after the next of all these Democratic power players, and you're basically alone in doing this research.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's for a couple of reasons. The first one is bias. I think everybody knows it's there. Even journalists that I know will admit that it's a problem. So part of it's bias. Part of it is they don't have the time and the inclination. They're chasing tweets. They're chasing, some hot riff they got from somebody. They're chasing some, anonymous source. This is a lot of hard work. I've got a lot of researchers spend a lot of time. So it takes a lot of grind work to dig into these documents and find this material.
Oh, no doubt. And it is not windy. So it's basically every sentence has something essential in it, which I really appreciate as well, because time is money in my view. And you go through and you walk through the life and times of Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, and Eric Garcetti. Those are your characters in the book, and they each get a chapter. And I'll tell you what I found, and tell me if you notice this. They basically seemed as the corruption level for themselves or their family is almost directly proportional to how well they're doing in the polls. It seemed like Biden comes off as the worst, Bernie comes off as the second worst, and right on down the list, just like that. It's very interesting to me. It seems like, and you conclude with this, so I know I'm giving away a little spoiler, but noting how it is clear our system is attracting corrupt people to it, and that is very frightening.
Yeah. No, I think that you hit the nail on the head. Our system is attracting that. Part of it is because there's not that accountability that we talked about earlier with a lot of media reporting. Part of it is they're getting really, really good at hiding their corruption. A lot of this corruption is legal.
Yes.
I mean, if you did it in the private sector, it would be illegal. But a lot of the rules or laws or regulations don't apply. The other thing I would say, though, is it's also proportionate to how long you've been in office. Those that have been in office the longest, I think, are the most corrupt, and also it's related to the amount of power they have. The more power you have, the more opportunity you have to self-enrich. So a guy like Joe Biden, who's been in office, since 1972, who's been vice president of the United States, is going to have more opportunities than a congressman who's been there for a couple of terms.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, as you noted, only possible because of the Trump obsession, that all of these are being missed. Not just, Peter, there's 100+ revelations in this book, and they're all missed. And they're missed because people are chasing Trump. They're chasing, can I tweet this out 40 seconds before the next guy tweets it out? And can I fire off a brilliant take that gets me a couple of retweets from blue checkmark people? That's what our media class is pursuing right now. They're not pursuing research. They're not trying to unearth a fact about the people who are in power.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, I mean, you and I have talked about it before. Donald Trump, needs accountability. He's the most powerful man in the world, and he gets that. But the problem is, it's become such a singular obsession, as if he's the only figure that really matters, the only one who warrants scrutiny, that everything else falls by the wayside. And that's why we felt the need to look at the progressives, because of the Trump vortex, as we call it,
Trump
sucks
vortex.
everything
It's a
down.
great line.
And then the second part of that is because progressives are unique. The reason we look at progressives is, unlike libertarians or moderates or conservatives or classical liberals who all believe government's either the size it should be or it should be a lot smaller. Progressives are saying, give us a whole lot more. Give us a whole lot more power.
Government's not nearly big enough.
It's not nearly big enough. And so, the question I wanted to answer is, well, what have they done with the power that they already have?
Sure.
If they're asking for a lot more, what have they done? And I think they've abused that power for their own personal benefit.
So no one comes off well. The only person who I think will surprise people that you focused on is where I actually want to begin briefly. I don't want to dwell on it too much. But I'm obsessed with Eric Garcetti. We went to the same high school.
I didn't know that.
Definitely wants to be president. He thinks he's going to be president. I think he's the worst mayor in America, even worse than Bill de Blasio. I was struck by a story I read this morning. I was a huge Kobe Bryant fan, and so it was very tough. Those of you who missed my opening hour Monday, I think it was very special because I got to reflect on it. I think those of you who don't like sports, I think you'll understand why I thought of him as a very important figure, because he was an example of not just someone who's super talented, but super hard worker. But he died in a helicopter crash. And why did he take a helicopter everywhere in Los Angeles? Because the traffic keeps getting worse. The greenest people on earth keep driving more cars and more polluting in Los Angeles. In the meantime, what is the mayor focused on? We have the worst airport in the world in Los Angeles. Literally, voters rated it number one. And I've been to LaGuardia, so that's pretty bad if you're seeing that it's number one. And traffic keeps getting worse. Schools have always been unusable. Illegal immigration has ruined those, and it has been forever. Homelessness getting worse. New homeless encampment on VA property now. Last time I was there, my whole life hadn't been there, brand new. And he thinks he's going to be president. And this is a guy whose priorities are ass backwards, for lack of a better expression. So, and you researched into him, which I was surprised by and I was heartened by, because he's a guy to stop, because he's terrible at what he does. Give me a Garcetti story. Give me a highlight.
Well, Garcetti realizes as mayor, one of the big levers of power that he has is you've got all these developers that either want to renovate existing hotels or apartment buildings, or they want to build new ones. And they need to basically get his approval. It's very, very hard to get big projects approved. So he set up this mayor's fund, which that sounds great. Let's have a mayor's fund.
Mayor's fund, yeah.
But basically what it is another pocket into which large developers need to deposit money. They need to donate to his campaign, but they also need to put it in the other pocket, the mayor's fund, which he then doles out to people that endorse him, people that support his campaign. And what you find, I know this is shocking, the people that give him money get their projects approved.
Unbelievable. I'm stunned. No, it is. You paint a vivid picture. For those of you who read the book, you're going to need to read the book, get all the details. But it's basically a way for people to buy favors from him. You put some money in the mayor's fund and you go to the top of the line. It's a fast pass like you're at Disneyland.
Yeah, no, that's right. And what ends up happening, I mean, we're not talking about just sort of skirting certain rules. I mean, some developers, will donate money to his fund. His fund takes in like $30 million, a year, some years, which is, huge amount of money, which he then doles out. But in some cases, you have developers that kick in a major donation, and the restriction or the regulation that gets removed is like a height restriction.
Yeah.
So you're in a neighborhood and it's been zoned to say, no building taller than say 12 stories. Well, suddenly somebody's putting up a 22-story building. You're like, what just happened? Well, what happened was the developer gave money to Eric Garcetti.
Right. So in the meantime, when he's not solving the actual problems in the city, like traffic and homelessness and the horrible airport, he's got this mayor's fund going. He's also pretty hypocritical in the environment. It sounds like he talks a big game in the environment, and then if you cut a check to the mayor's fund, all of a sudden he cares less about the environmental sensitivity of your project.
Absolutely.
And then you see how the city is barely functional. Average of 373 days to make a hire for a city position.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. 1/6 of employees are on workers' compensation. 1/3 in the police department, fire department on workers' compensation.
Yeah.
I mean, that is and then they will say we don't have enough money for the schools.
Right.
That's what they will announce.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
Paying all these people not to work.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the fire department. I mean, there's a case, several cases involving, people with the fire department that are supposed to be doing inspections, safety inspections of projects, which ends up happening. They weren't actually doing them. But because the fire union endorsed him and supported him, and particularly certain leaders, he just basically brushes that stuff away. So it's a protection racket. It's kind of a mafia type system.
You go in one detail where there is a clear case of corruption at the fire department, and he just sat on it. It was just, why did he do that? What is this story?
Yeah, I mean, basically the story is a guy that was making up inspections, and this is a senior guy in the
and getting paid with taxpayer money.
Exactly, getting paid well with taxpayer money, it turned out that this guy, had put in all these reports saying I inspected this property, I inspected that property. Well, some people in the fire department retraced the steps and said, no, you didn't go to any of these places, and there was a vice chief of the fire department who raised these issues. issues. Well, somebody got fired. It wasn't the guy who was falsifying the stuff because he was in good with the union.
Yes.
It was the guy who actually reported it and uncovered the fact. He got removed from his position because he raised it. And Garcetti initially said, well, I didn't have anything to do with that, but it turned out later on that he actually did.
The book's already worth it. Profiles in Corruption. Peter Schweizer is here with me the whole hour. Right there. For a guy most of you are probably not familiar with. Right there, that's enough. But Peter also dives deep into the biggest players in the Democratic Party at the moment. I found it very illuminating, and I'm a California guy, so I've been well aware of Kamala Harris and her rise for a very long time. But I was stunned at how the Willie Brown affair that she had was not just salacious and naughty and kind of funny. It opened all of the doors to her career.
Yeah.
This is something where I didn't understand at how her having an affair with Willie Brown really was. That's it. She's where she is because of this. Talk to us about what I'm talking about and give you some details.
Sure. So Willie Brown, longtime, Speaker of the Assembly in California, big power player in California politics, then runs for mayor of San Francisco and wins. And as he's running, shortly before he's running for mayor, he meets Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is 28 at the time. Willie Brown is 65. There's also that minor factor that Willie's married. He's been married for 40 years at this point. But they strike up let's say, a very public relationship. They go to a lot of events together. She gets job promotions within the city bureaucracy. He buys her I think it's a BMW 7 Series.
Oh boy, that's
yeah.
I gotta say, I can't afford that one.
Yeah, which has always kind of bugged me. Like, how does the Speaker of the California Assembly afford a BMW 7 Series for somebody else? This isn't even the car that he's driving. But
it's shameless, but it just shows you how the culture there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, there's a lot of rumors that he's going to divorce his wife and marry Kamala, and that doesn't happen. There's this dispute about whether Kamala broke up with him, he broke up with her. But anyway, by the early 2000s, she has ambitions to run for the district attorney of San Francisco. So she opens up her campaign. And when you start looking at, who's funding her campaign, who's organizing her campaign, who's running her campaign, it's Willie Brown.
It's the Brown machine.
Exactly. It's the Brown machine.
And his machine is so big, and that's the thing that I knew he was a major player in California politics. I knew he was one of the biggest players, but I didn't fully grasp until reading your book exactly how powerful the machine was, that they just anointed her DA, and then she's rode that all the way to the point where she is now, where she's a well-known senator, and very well, if she knew how to campaign, could have been the nominee.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, she wins in 2003 and becomes San Francisco district attorney. There's all kinds of sketchy things. Basically, what happens is she wins that position, and then a lot of Willie's friends are being prosecuted by her predecessor, a guy named Hallinan, and she drops those cases.
So this is a pattern with her, that she takes donations. You document a pattern from people she's investigating. She most famously didn't prosecute a massive priest abuse case,
right,
where she took donations from those who were looking to cover up the case. Go into this.
Right, yeah. So she becomes San Francisco district attorney. Her predecessor, Hallinan, had talked to the archdiocese in San Francisco and basically forced them to turn over these documents to talk about priest abuse going back 50 years. Hallinan's going to take those documents and look at prosecuting existing priests, but he also wants to obviously take out the victims' names, but he's looking at releasing this 700-page document so there can be greater transparency. This is going on all around the country. She comes in. First of all, she ends up never prosecuting a single case that Richard Hallinan was pursuing. But the second thing is this document, this 700-page document that all the victims groups want released, she deep sixes. Nobody can now even find that document. Now, what's curious is her rise to power is related to massive donations from people that are connected to Willie Brown, but also connected to the archdiocese, the law firms that are handling all of these priest abuse cases, the law firms that handle commercial transactions for the archdiocese, and this is particularly important, The political machine in Northern California, in San Francisco, including Jerry Brown and the Getty family, are all tied in with sort of the Catholic hierarchy that really elements of it want this to just kind of go away. So it's a massive cover-up in that regard, and Kamala Harris is unique. She has that position in San Francisco for 7 years. During that 7-year period, she never prosecutes a single case of priest abuse. If you look at the other top 50 metropolitan cities in America, that would certainly include San Francisco. San Francisco is the only one during that time period that did not prosecute a single case.
Brilliant. Yeah, producer Paul reminds me, Eric Garcetti's also working on Latinx representation in film. So that's good. So we're not going to fix the traffic. We're going to continue to be corrupt, but we will have more Latinx in film. That'll fix Hollywood. All right. So the two front runners come off as the worst in the book, and no one comes off good, as I mentioned. But the two that come off worst are Biden and Bernie, and let's take them in order. It's Biden. Some of the stories are just funny. How Six Pack Joe would have the Amtrak train held up so that everyone else had to be late.
That's one of my favorite stories.
Go for it, Peter.
Well, no, it's one of my favorite stories because it's something we hear all the time. He's Amtrak Joe, and a regular guy. He rides the train.
Which, by the way, that's like $500 in train fares a day. So I don't know if that's. I don't know how working class that is.
Exactly, but it's got that motif, right? It's got the working class motif, and so we were just kind of looking at Biden and his career. What we ran across were these stories in the Delaware papers about Joe does ride the train all the time. But if Joe's running late, Joe calls Amtrak and they hold the entire train until Joe shows up, which is great for Joe. I don't know that Alex, you and I try that would work.
And I'm sure the other move. And I'm sure the working class move.
Yeah, the other commuters probably wonder what the heck's going on? Why is the train not moving? So that to me represents the dichotomy of the image we have of Joe, which is Amtrak Joe, and the reality of actually how he abuses that power.
Sure. So let's get into some of the big reveals. And the China ties with Joe, I still don't feel like we've adequately got this into the public consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's China is no question our biggest rival on the stage. I mean, Russia's a declining power. Japan, the European countries are not rivals the same way. It's China. And you have this situation where Joe Biden becomes vice president of the United States. He is the point person on China. He's somewhat of a old hand at China because he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee all those years, traveled to China. He becomes vice president, and then suddenly, sort of out of the blue, his son, Hunter, gets these deals courtesy of the Chinese government.
Yeah, and we all are talking about the Ukraine deals because the president is really getting impeached over them, which is unbelievable. Blows my mind.
Yes.
But the China deals are bigger. These are even bigger deals, and they're even more shameless because he's traveling on Air Force Two. There's literally photos of him coming out of Air Force Two. Guy knows nothing about China, and he's getting these deals, billion-dollar contracts, no competition to them. It is so clear that the whole point was, and this came up in a conversation yesterday we were having, Peter, that it happened, Ukraine happened in China. This was all about trying to buy policy influence via Hunter Biden.
Absolutely.
There's simply no doubt about it. And Joe let it happen. Why did Joe allow for his son? Let's do Ukraine first, then go to China. Mm-hmm. He's in charge of Ukraine policy.
Right.
And his son is taking a fat check every month, $1 million a year from Ukraine. How could he have allowed for that?
I think it's a common thing you see. You see Republicans do it as well sometimes, although I've never seen a case this egregious, where they believe they deserve it. Joe Biden convinces himself, I've been serving the country in the Senate for 40 years. I made all these sacrifices for people. I even ride the Amtrak train.
It's an entitlement.
Yes.
See, but this is the thing. That's why it's important, the story about him holding the train.
Yes.
That it's the he feels entitled to this.
He absolutely does. And what's important in this case, Alex, and I mentioned this, is people say like, well, if you got the name Biden or Bush, you're going to have certain advantages. But the key on all this stuff you have to look at, I think, with corruption is timing. And you mentioned Ukraine, and the timing is clear. February of 2014, Putin moves into Crimea. That creates this whole crisis. In March, the next month, March of 2014, Joe is point person on Ukraine policy. Within 3 weeks, Ukrainians suddenly decide, hey, Hunter Biden's the guy, the expert, we want to join this company. And yeah, we need to pay him $1 million a year. You look at that and think, this is absurd. It's not like he was advising Ukraine in 2005. It's same thing with China. They do the pivot to China in 2011, 2012. Joe goes over there, one of his first significant trips, and what does he do? His son comes with him.
Yes.
And 10 days after the trip, the son suddenly announces this $1.5 billion private equity deal. It's clear, it's crystal clear what's going on here.
So the $1 billion deals don't stop there. They don't stop with China. He also has them with Russia,
right,
and Kazakhstan, greatest country in the world.
Right. Yeah, by the way, these are all countries with lots of transparency, a lot of checks and balances. They all have a Securities and Exchange Commission that tracks these things. No, it's a rogues gallery. And so Hunter Biden has this company, Seneca, that Rosemont Seneca, that's involved with the China deal,
which is also Teresa Heinz Kerry's son.
Owns half of it, correct.
So, whose stepfather was Secretary of State.
At the same time, very convenient.
That doesn't smell.
Yeah, that's very convenient. But Hunter Biden also sets up this other company called the Burnham Financial Group.
Right.
And the Burnham Financial Group, when you go through, there was a court trial, so we got access to some of the corporate records. I mean, again, you've got deals with Kazakh officials, with a guy named Rakashev, who's this Kazakh oligarch. You've got this reference in corporate documents to this $200 million deal that they have with Yelena Baturina. Now, Yelena Baturina is the ex-wife of the mayor of Moscow. And if you spend 5 minutes on Google with Yelena Baturina, you realize that law enforcement across the Western world believe she's at the center point of Russian organized crime. Well, they're saying in corporate documents we have a $200 million deal with this individual. This is all going on. It doesn't happen before he's vice president. It's not really happening since he's been vice president. It's happening in this one island of 8 years.
Yeah, and that's always the pattern, and that's why you knew the Clintons were corrupt. The best evidence you had was the speaking fees and the donations to the Clinton Foundation all dried up once they didn't have power. So
did they dry up? Yeah.
Yes, to zero. Okay. Tell me about Devin Archer.
So Devin Archer was a classmate with Chris Hines at Yale, and he and Chris Hines and Hunter Biden set up this partnership, this company, and he's really the deal maker in a sense. I think he's the guy that shows up in a lot of places. But Devin Archer not only wants these deals, he also says Burnham Financial Group, where Hunter Biden has an office and is on the payroll, wants to do this deal with the Oglala Sioux tribe of South Dakota. Okay, so we got Kazakhstan, China, and Ukraine. We're also going to throw in the poorest Indian tribe in America.
Literally the poorest.
Literally the poorest. And what he convinces them of is, let's do this $60 million bond scheme that ends up being a fraudulent bond scheme that's an attempt to basically rip off these Indian tribes. And, by the way, let's rip off some labor union pension funds as well. And he ends up being charged in 2016 on this. He's convicted. A judge has now overturned that conviction. There's going to be a retrial. But what's clear when you go through those corporate documents, Alex, is that Devin Archer was definitely involved much more with Burnham Financial Group. But Hunter Biden's name and Joe Biden's name came up all the time when they met with these pension fund officials. It was Joe Biden. Joe's the big labor union guy, etc. So it just shows the sort of fraudulent levels in which some of these transactions were involved, and how the name played a big role.
All of these are just, and again, I don't want to spend too much time going big picture because I want to get as many of the news details out as we can. But this is all, just picture if this was the Trump family, what would happen? Just picture it. They trying to grift off of the poorest Indian tribe.
Right.
I mean, and leveraging the names of your family members to do that. It's just stunning. Okay, talk to me about Startup Health.
Startup Health. So this is a really interesting story to me for a lot of reasons, because Joe Biden has said repeatedly, I have never discussed any business matters with any of my family members.
Yes.
So in that context, in June of 2011, Joe Biden escorts these young businessmen into the Oval Office to meet with Barack Obama, and they have their picture taken. These guys have just started a company called Startup Health. It's a healthcare investment firm.
Sure.
It's like venture capital firm for healthcare. They get their picture taken with a Barack. They take that photo, they put it up on their website, say, look how cool and how tied in we are. The next day, the federal government, the Obama-Biden administration, is having this data conference on healthcare. Startup Health, even though it's a new company, is featured there. Then, over the next 5 years, up through 2016, Joe Biden shows up at Startup Health conferences and events. These are closed-door events for investors and for partners with Startup Health, et cetera. He does all of this, really clearly benefiting the company, showing how juiced in they are. Well, the factor that I haven't mentioned is that one of the three principals involved with this company is married to his daughter. And I think explains what's going on here. So now how you do all of that and hold true to your statement that you've never had a conversation with a family member about business matters is patently absurd.
It's absurd. Yeah, so this is, let's get into Frank Biden a little bit. And the thing that there were two really stunning stories to me. There's a lot because he had a lot of projects that received millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded loans, but he came off as one of the dirtiest characters in the whole book. He's liable for an automobile death and never paid, and Joe Biden covered for him.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, very tragic situation in 2000. Frank Biden is with another guy. Frank has rented this Jaguar, and he's letting the other guy drive it, and they have three girls in the back seat. And the guy that's driving it is, going 70 in a 35. They hit this man who's a single father, who has two teenage daughters, single father. He hits the car, goes over the top of the car, and of course dies. And now the three girls in the back of the car say that Frank, once this happened, told the guy driving, keep driving, keep driving.
Wow.
So the estate for the girls that are survived after their fathers died sues Frank Biden. The driver, of course, is sent to jail for his criminal driving, reckless driving. They go after Frank with a civil suit. Frank doesn't show up to court, doesn't really respond to the allegations. So the court says, you're liable for $250,000. They now try to collect it. The court's now trying to collect this debt. They hire a private investigator.
Which is really a token in the scheme of things.
Yes, absolutely. And this speaks to that, I think, to that issue of entitlement. Again.
Yes.
It's really not about the money. It's like, I am not going to pay this. I don't want to pay this.
Yes.
So they hire a private detective to find Frank because nobody can find Frank. The private detective knows that, finds out that he's living with Joe and that in Delaware, that Joe is essentially helping him. Then they go to Joe Biden. They actually write a letter to Joe Biden saying, this is what happened. Your brother is liable. The letter, which he wrote back, which we got from one of the attorneys involved in the case, is so cold and so calculating, particularly, by the way, for a man, Joe Biden, who lost his wife and his daughter in a car accident as well. Where he basically says, well, Frank doesn't have the money. I'm certainly not liable.
Right.
And I just wish you well. That's basically what he says in this letter. And so that sort of sets up the entirety in my mind for a lot of what Frank is doing, which is Frank is doing overseas deals in places like Costa Rica and Jamaica. Because why does he want to do them overseas? Because that's beyond the reach of the court. That debt now is ballooned to like $900,000.
Unbelievable. And in the meantime, he's also running really what my notes say is a real estate charter school grift, where he figured out a way to cut these real estate deals for charter schools and was able to enrich himself that way. Talk to us about this a bit.
Yeah, so he sets up this company that's involved with charter school real estate. Now, I think charter schools are great.
Same.
I think they're very, very good. Not all of them are perfect, but
better than what we
absolutely
got.
So, a big fan of charter schools. But what he realizes is that there's not much money to be made in running charter schools. The money is to be made in the real estate of charter schools. So basically, he gets involved with investors. They buy properties and then they lease these to charter schools. The charter schools, using taxpayer money, are essentially paying off their leases. And one of the things we found, Alex, is that some of the people that he's involved in that finance these deals are the most sketchy of characters. There's a guy that has a criminal record, a violent criminal record from the past, was widely believed in southern Florida for being involved in the drug trade. His brother actually was found in a shallow grave because of a major drug deal gone bad. And yet Frank Biden did major real estate transactions and deals with these guys and helped them make money through this charter school grift. And he said, look, there's no money in charter schools. The big money is in the real estate, and that's where I'm spending my time.
It's unbelievable. And we haven't even touched on the entirety of the Biden family, the Biden five: Frank, Valerie, James, Ashley, and Hunter. There's so much more on Biden in the book, but I do want to touch on some of the others. But the main takeaway I took from Biden is that Joe Biden is either too weak to stand up to his family, or he is in on it. And both are terrible, especially if he's running for president. It's one or the other, because he could not stand up to his family. He let them grift off the American people repeatedly and take advantage of not just his name, it's his office. It's
Correct.
his power.
Right.
It's that we give to him as voters. Or he was in on it. He's just a liar, stone cold liar, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. We don't know what goes on in his head, but people will say sometimes, well, politician can't control what their family does.
Yeah.
And that's true, but you can control their access to the levers of power. And we know that Hunter flew on Air Force Two with his dad right before this deal was secured. We know that other family members have come to White House state dinners. We know that Frank Biden, who's engaged in all this, bizarre commercial activity, actually met with Barack Obama with 3 other people in the Oval Office. That does not happen if Joe Biden sends the signal, I love my brother, but he's doing stuff I don't agree with.
Yes.
I don't want him to have access to the levers of power.
It's that entitlement. Okay, so I thought the person who came off worst in the book, believe it or not, even a little bit worse than Biden, was Bernie Sanders. We all knew that Bernie was the only socialist in America with 3 homes, one that is lakefront. But it looks like a series of, the corruption he's dripping with it. It's not just that he is inauthentic to be a socialist that's worth at least $15 million with 3 homes. But it seems like he's really been using legal loopholes to enrich himself. One of the things that I was laughing at, Peter, because we were at a little book party for you yesterday, and how there may be 50 or 100 books around. Bernie's campaign used to buy gobs and gobs of Bernie's book.
Right.
So that was so you donate to Bernie, and then Bernie buys Bernie's books.
That's right.
And that's the pattern that he had his whole life. So let's start with Burlington College,
right.
Which seemed like a legit fraud to me. Talk to me about Burlington College.
Yeah, Burlington College was because it's now shut down, was this, sort of, let's say, hippie college that had 200 students and it had, financial troubles. It was kind of limping along. And they hired Jane Sanders, Bernie's wife, to come on as president. And they're very explicit saying they brought on Jane because of who Bernie was and the connections that he has. So Jane becomes the president of the college. She's being paid a very nice salary for a college that size, about $180,000, $200,000 a year. Yeah. And she has ambitious plans. She wants to expand the college. So she takes on these loans to buy additional property and buildings so she can expand the college. Now, the problem is, on these bank loans that she applied, the applications, she claimed several individuals had committed to making $1 million or more contributions to the college. And that was essentially what she was saying, where the money was going to come from the loans. The problem is, after the fact, after the college collapsed, people went back and asked those individuals, they said, I never pledged that money. I never pledged that money. So this spawned the FBI investigation to look at, was she engaged in bank fraud by deceiving the bankers? But the problem is even more direct in the sense that they take on this debt, they're having financial difficulties, they're limping along, they're having cash flow problems. What's going on while that happens? Well, Jane, the budget of the college is like $3 million a year. Jane starts funneling money to a woodworking school that just happens to be run. It's an unaccredited woodworking school that just happens to be run by her daughter. and she sends $500,000
Unbelievable.
to this entity,
kind of like a sixth of the budget. Maybe
yeah, while her college is having these financial difficulties.
Unaccredited woodworking school. This isn't a joke. Not a joke.
Yeah.
Joe Biden would say.
Yeah, and it fits the pattern. I mean, we see this all the time. Family members get hired. And
but let's talk about maybe the biggest reveal in the Sanders section, which is the media buying, and Bernie finding a loophole to really, it appears, make himself incredibly wealthy, and we don't even know how wealthy. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, so one of the dirty secrets in Washington, D.C. is if you're running for office and you do media buys. If Alex, if you ran for the Senate and you said to me, Peter, I want you to buy $1 million in television ads, I, as your media buyer, it would show up on the FEC filing that you gave $1 million to my company. But the industry standard is I'm entitled to 15% of that as a commission for myself. Sure. But that never shows up. Well, Bernie apparently figured this out because Jane, his wife, became his media buyer for his congressional campaigns. So we don't know exactly how much money she got, but we believe it was probably in the magnitude of $150,000. But the big money came when he ran for president in 2016. And there's a lot of mystery here, but I think a lot of reason to be concerned. Because this time, he's running for president, he's got all this money, he's going to spend $83 million on media buys. 15%, that's about a $12 million commission.
Okay, so where did the $12 million go? Do we know? Do we know who got it?
We do not, but we have some clues. Here's the troubling part. So that $83 million goes through a company called Old Town Media.
Yeah.
Okay, great, Old Town Media. Well, Old Town Media doesn't have a website, doesn't really have other clients at this time.
Oh.
And it's registered, the LLC, Old Town Media, is registered to this private residential home in suburban Virginia.
That's typical, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you find out who actually owns the company. It's two old friends of Jane Sanders.
What?
Yes.
No,
yes.
Not Jane Sanders again. She's back. So she's a big character in this. And so we assume that the Sanderses are basically enriching the Sanderses. And this is the pattern you document with Sanders buying his own books, Sanders cutting Sanders' checks from Sanders' businesses. You document a lot of times where he'll set up a nonprofit and then it'll go bust very quickly. This is another way to kind of send yourself more money.
That's exactly right. He does this regularly, and when he sets up nonprofits, he usually puts a family member in charge, and they're the highest paid family member, and
the highest paid person. Right,
exactly. Yeah. And on the media buying issue, after he loses in 2016, he sets up this 501c4 kind of activist group called Our Revolution, there are all these young idealists who love Bernie, who are all very excited, they want to be involved, and then they find out that the plan is to take the money the group is raising and do what? Do media buys.
Right.
And half a dozen of them end up quitting because they say, we're not here to do media buys. We thought this was actually about grassroots work.
Yes. And that's not what it is. He's not. And the biggest evidence, you note that since he's been a senator, he's written more books than he's passed significant pieces of legislation. And because he's a socialist, I'm sure none of the books have a copyright. I'm sure he just lets them out. They're just available for anyone who wants to use it.
Right. Yeah. No, he takes the profits. The only person that's written as many books as him in the Senate was the late John McCain. And McCain, you could argue, well, he had some war stories to tell, obviously.
Sure. And a big opinion of himself.
Yes, he had a big opinion of himself. And he did donate some of those proceeds to charity.
Yes.
Bernie does not do that. The biggest charity in Bernie's life is Bernie.
Yeah, that's exactly right. See, I got to tell you, and we're just scratching the surface on Bernie, and it's his army of small donors. Peter, you noted that sometimes the small donors is the same person 50 times,
right? Who's worth $500 million or something,
and
right?
The small donors, you just donate 50 times, 50 different ways,
right.
And it counts. It's just it's mind blowing stuff. He of course hates war, but wanted fighter planes stationed at Burlington International Airport because it's benefits the city and benefits jobs, using taxpayer money to benefit his donors' businesses over and over again. His campaign about $500,000 worth of his own book. I mean, come on, how could you?
I think I need to start.
Obvious.
I need to start a campaign,
that's
Alex,
right.
so I can buy my own book. Yeah, I'm
so impressed. The Sanders chapter is just. It's actually that was my favorite read because it is
good.
What a character Bernie is.
Yeah,
I'm not going to get into Cory Booker, even though he's portrayed as a huge BSer. And you guys are not going to want to miss the story of T-Bone, the fake gang member from Cory Booker's past, which is in the book, and how Cory Booker used really taxpayer money to fund his campaigns and campaign material. You'll want to read about that. You'll want to read about Sherrod Brown, Ohio senator, who could very well be a vice presidential candidate, who lied about being a farmer and is a populist but never has had a job other than elected office. So all that I will save for you when you buy the book. But let's talk a little bit. Peter's back now with the 5 or 6 minutes we have left. A little Liz Warren, a little Amy Klobuchar. You again paint a very vivid picture that Elizabeth Warren absolutely would not be where she is if she had not lied about being a Native American, and how the Ivy League was her partner in crime on this. They're accomplices in this as well, because they really milked it that she was an Indian, which of course she was not. But let's talk a little bit about some of her background. She was really a predatory home flipper.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have that image of her, but that's exactly right. She provided the capital, and with her brothers in Oklahoma, would flip properties, but they would flip properties for people that were distressed because of financial crisis, people that were getting foreclosed on and other properties. And she made very, very good money doing that. She's criticized other people for doing that, but she did it herself and did very, very well in Oklahoma real estate at a time when that state was going through a lot of difficulty because of the energy, problems related to energy prices and a bad economy. But she profited from it and did very well.
Okay, so and then let's tell me about Dow Chemical.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people don't realize that Elizabeth Warren in the mid-1990s was paid by us, by taxpayers, and hired by Congress to rewrite portions of bankruptcy law, dealing with mass torts and product liability, et cetera. While she was doing that, and after, she started going to large companies that would be affected by this law and said, hey, you can hire me as an expert. I will help you navigate around and through this law to your own benefit. And that's what she did. So Dow Chemical hired her, Armstrong Worldwide. There's a whole host of companies that did. And it's the oldest game in Washington. Come to me, powerful company, pay me lots of money, and I will help you interpret and get around a law that I myself actually wrote. And so she's made millions of dollars doing that for corporations. And she, by the way, in these cases or in these instances, represents the corporation. She doesn't represent the victims. With Dow Chemical, it was women with breast implants and the problems being caused there. Women in a lot of cases.
Corporations. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying who's right or wrong. I'm saying that she makes a living demonizing corporations.
That's exactly right. But there's a second level to it. It's not just her. It's her daughter who set up this company called BTG that has a lot of corporate clients. She actually raised the money while her mother was the chairman of the TARP oversight. And you remember TARP was the Troubled Asset Relief Program that was bailing out Wall Street firms. Her daughter was raising money and hiring advisors that were being bailed out by her mother for her new business.
Right. So also you go into how she's worth at least $15 million and says she's not wealthy.
Right.
So it's she emphatically says she's not wealthy. And we don't have time to get into it, but we could have done a whole segment on her son-in-law. So I will leave that for the book. Another one of my favorite reads was the Amy Klobuchar chapter. We know that she is a reputation for being the meanest senator, for being incredibly nasty to her staff. Those stories are legion, and you go into a few of them. But I did not know that she votes with Bernie Sanders 88% of the time.
Yeah.
And she is responsible for arguably covering up the second biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of the country, behind the Bernie Madoff scheme, because of this guy named Petters, who is an ally of Walter Mondale, who was her ally and her mentor.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, Amy Klobuchar makes a big deal about the fact in her memoirs and on the campaign trail that she was the prosecutor, the county prosecutor in Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis area of Minnesota, and she went after financial fraudsters. And she gives these examples, and it's basically people like Northwest Airlines pilots who claimed status as living in another state to avoid paying state income taxes in Minnesota. That's who she threw the book at. Who she did not go after was Petters, who ran this company called Petters Worldwide, ended up being the second, other than Bernie Madoff, the second largest Ponzi scheme in American history. And there was all kinds of evidence that this was going on. She actually prosecuted people that knew Petters, and she had evidence of what Petters was doing, but she didn't go after him. And one of the reasons, I believe, is that Petters and his company were the largest campaign contributors to her Senate bid. And when he finally got arrested by the FBI, one of the first calls he made was to Amy Klobuchar, who recommended the lawyer that he ended up hiring.
Unbelievable. Peter Schweizer, this is a crowning achievement.